My name is Cora Dean, and I was 28 years old on the Christmas Eve that my heart broke on my aunt's polished oak doorstep. I stood there on the precipice of what I prayed would be a reunion, the cold air of port blossom biting at my cheeks, a homemade apple walnut tart clutched in one hand, and a bag of thoughtfully chosen gifts in the other. Hope is a fragile, flickering thing, and I watched it extinguish in the space of a heartbeat as my Aunt Sylvia's welcoming smile dissolved into a mask of cool dismissal. Her words, though spoken softly, landed like shards of ice. "Oh, Cora. There's been a misunderstanding. It's best if you don't come in." Through the sliver of open door, I saw it all. The warm, golden glow of the living room, the glittering tree, and the silhouettes of my family, my mother, my brother, my sister, their laughter echoing in a world I was suddenly no longer a part of. A quiet nod was all I could manage. A whispered, "I see." And then I turned and walked away. 10 minutes later, as I sat in my car in a silent, snow-dusted park, my father's car screeched to a halt beside me, his face a storm of worry and love. That night was not an ending, but a violent, shattering beginning. To understand the weight of that closed door, you have to understand the 5 years of quiet drifting that preceded it. Growing up in the Dean family, before the fracture, was like living in a watercolor painting, soft-edged, warm, and filled with light. Our home in the leafy suburbs of Port Blossom was a place of creativity and noise. My father, Thomas, is a structural engineer, a man of quiet strength and unwavering logic, but with a soul full of poetry. He could explain the physics of a suspension bridge and then spend an hour helping me perfect the shading on a sketch of that same bridge. My mother, Eleanor, was his perfect complement, a whirlwind of passion and artistry, her hands always covered in clay from the potter's wheel in her studio. She taught me that beauty could be found in imperfection, in the beautiful asymmetry of life itself. The fracture began when I was 23, and it wasn't a sudden, explosive event, but a slow, quiet cracking that spread until the entire foundation of our family was compromised. The divorce was, on the surface, amicable. But beneath the surface, my mother's younger sister, Sylvia, was at work. Sylvia is a woman who glitters. Perfectly dressed, perfectly coiffed, with a career in finance that she spoke of in hushed, important tones. She saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, and in her eyes, my gentle, unassuming father was a liability my mother could no longer afford. My relationship with Sylvia had always been a careful dance. Even as a child, her compliments felt like critiques. "Landscape architecture is a lovely hobby, Cora," she'd said when I declared my college major, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "But it's glorified gardening, isn't it? Not exactly a stable career." Each word was a tiny, precisely aimed dart, and over the years, they had left their marks. Dad was always my balm, the one who would listen to my wounded recounting of Sylvia's words and say, "Corey, your work isn't about gardening. It's about creating spaces where people can breathe. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for that." My siblings navigated the schism in their own ways. Nathan, 2 years my senior, had always been pragmatic. He sought stability and approval, and after the divorce, he found both by aligning himself with Mom and, by extension, Sylvia. He pursued a business degree, followed the path she implicitly laid out for him, and became her shining example of a son who'd made the right choices. My younger sister, Iris, was only 16 when our parents split. The divorce hit her like a tidal wave, and she retreated into the silent world of her art, her canvases filled with stormy seas and solitary figures. But she remained in the family home, a quiet satellite in my mother's new, Sylvia-influenced orbit, slowly absorbing the narrative that our father had, in some unspoken way, failed them. The divorce proceedings were where Sylvia's influence became an overt poison. Dad wanted a simple, fair division of their life together. He offered Mom the family house, a generous portion of their savings, wanting only to ensure she was secure. But Sylvia, with her financial acumen and whispers of hidden accounts and shrewd investments Dad must have made, convinced Mom that his generosity was a cover for deceit. The process became a protracted, painful ordeal. "He's abandoning you, Eleanor," became Sylvia's refrain, a phrase she repeated until it became a truth my mother and siblings accepted, despite Dad's constant, unwavering presence at every concert, game, and parent-teacher conference he was still allowed to attend. When the legal dust settled, the emotional debris remained. Nathan and Iris stayed with Mom in the sprawling house that no longer felt like home to me. I was finishing my degree, and I found my refuge in Dad's new apartment, a sun-drenched loft in the newly revitalized Maritime District, with views of the bustling port and the endless sky. Those weekends became my lifeline, a space where I could be myself without apology. Holidays transformed from joyous gatherings into tense diplomatic missions orchestrated by Sylvia. Eleanor doesn't feel it would be appropriate for Thomas to attend Thanksgiving, Cora. It would just be too painful for her, she would inform me in a sympathetic tone, as if she were a neutral mediator and not the architect of the pain itself. Another year it was, we've made plans with Nathan's girlfriend's family for Christmas Eve, so the table is just completely full. I'm so sorry, darling. Each exclusion was a fresh wound, but Dad, in his infinite patience, would simply say, they're healing in their own way, Corey. Love is a choice you keep making, even when it's hard. Just keep showing up with an open heart. And so I did. For 5 years, I kept showing up. For months before that Christmas, I landed a position that felt like a culmination of all my dreams. I joined Terra Firma Collective, a small, visionary landscape architecture firm in Port Blossom. We specialized in creating sustainable, community-focused public spaces. My first major assignment was the lead design role for the Riverbend Park project, a plan to transform a derelict industrial waterfront into a thriving public garden and community hub. The hours were grueling, the responsibility immense, but I felt alive, my hands in the soil of my own life, finally building something real and beautiful. Dad was over the moon. He came to the site, asked intelligent questions about drainage and native plantings, and saw the vision as clearly as I did. When I called Mom to share the news, her response was lukewarm. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she said, her voice distant. "Did I tell you Nathan just closed a major deal at his firm? Sylvia is planning a dinner to celebrate. We're all so proud." Still, I persisted. I sent Mom invitations for coffee that were always met with a gentle, "Perhaps next week, dear." I mailed Iris a set of rare, imported watercolor pigments I knew she'd love, and received a brief, polite text of thanks. I even sent Aunt Sylvia a congratulatory note when I heard she'd been made a senior partner at her firm. My overtures were rarely reciprocated, but I held on to Dad's words, keep showing up with an open heart. So, when my mother's number flashed on my screen in early December, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, I felt a jolt of cautious optimism. "Cora," she began, "we were thinking. Sylvia is hosting Christmas Eve dinner, and we think it's time to put the past behind us. We'd love for you to come." Her voice was soft, the way I remembered it from my childhood, before it was always filtered through a lens of careful consideration. "Everyone will be there." "Everyone?" I asked, the word catching in my throat. A beat of silence. "Well, not your father, of course," she said, the familiar edge creeping back in. "But Nathan is bringing his fiancée, and Iris is excited to show you her portfolio for her art school applications." The hope, tentative as it was, took root. I spent the next 2 weeks in a flurry of activity, balancing the intense final push on the Riverbend Park proposal with the secret, joyful task of preparing for Christmas Eve. I decided my gifts would not be mere objects, but olive branches, each one a testament to my love and my memory of who we were. For Mom, I found an old, faded photograph of her and my grandmother, laughing together in a field of wildflowers. I had it professionally restored and framed in simple, elegant silver. For Nathan, the pragmatist, I tracked down a beautiful, vintage map of Port Blossom's original shipping routes from the 1800s, a nod to his love of history and business. For my quiet, artistic Iris, I compiled a book of my own college design work, with handwritten notes about my favorite professors, the best quiet spots on campus to sketch, and encouragement to follow her true passion. Even for Aunt Sylvia, I chose something with care. It was a hand-bound leather journal, its cover the color of a deep merlot, with her initial embossed in gold. Inside, on the first page, I wrote a simple inscription, "For new chapters, C." It was a quiet prayer for a new beginning. "You're a better person than I am, Corey," Dad said when I showed him the carefully wrapped packages. We were in his loft, the scent of garlic and rosemary from the roast chicken he was making filling the air. "Just be careful with your heart. You know you can call me anytime if things don't feel right." "They will, Dad," I said, my voice full of a conviction I willed myself to feel. "It's been 5 years. People change. Families heal." He pulled me into a hug, his embrace a familiar comfort. "I hope you're right, sweetheart." "I truly do." The day before Christmas, my small apartment was filled with the warm, spicy scent of cinnamon and baked apples. I was making my Grandma Dean's apple walnut tart, a recipe Dad had taught me that first lonely Christmas after the divorce. As I crimped the edges of the pastry, I felt a sense of connection to the generations of Dean women who had performed this same ritual. I was bringing a piece of his family, of our shared history, to her table. I chose my outfit with the care of a diplomat preparing for a summit, a deep emerald velvet dress that felt festive but understated, paired with a delicate silver locket my father had given me for my college graduation. I wanted to look like I was thriving, not to show off, but to show them that I was whole, that I was happy, and that I wanted to share that happiness with them. That night, sleep was a fleeting visitor. My mind toggled between two futures, one filled with the stilted silence and veiled criticisms I feared, and another, the one I clung to, filled with laughter, understanding, and the quiet, miraculous mending of our fractured family. "Tomorrow will be different," I promised my reflection in the dark window, the lights of Port Blossom twinkling below like a field of fallen stars. It has to be. Christmas morning dawned cold and brilliant, a fresh blanket of snow muffling the city in a sacred hush. My phone buzzed with goodwill. A picture from my best friend Chloe of her chaotic family Christmas, a simple "thinking of you" from my colleague Liam, and a text from Dad, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I love you." The day passed in a slow, dreamlike haze of anticipation. By 3 o'clock, my stomach was a knot of nerves. I touched the locket at my throat for luck, gathered the tart and the gifts, and stepped out into the crisp winter air. The drive to Willow Creek Estates felt like a journey back in time. The grand, Tudor-style houses were draped in elegant white lights, each one a portrait of festive tranquility. Sylvia's home was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a massive spruce tree glittering in the front window. I parked behind Nathan's sleek sedan and took a moment to breathe, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Through the window, I could see them moving inside, their laughter a faint, happy melody carried on the wind. They were all there. They were waiting. "New chapters," I whispered, my breath a cloud in the frosty air. I walked up the stone path, each click of my heels on the cleared pavement sounding unnaturally loud. Standing before the heavy oak door, I took one last, deep breath and rang the bell. The melodic chimes were followed by a sudden silence from within. I heard footsteps, the lock turning, and the door swung open. Sylvia stood there, resplendent in a cashmere dress the color of wine, a string of pearls at her throat. For a single, beautiful second, her eyes widened, and I thought I saw genuine surprise, a flicker of a welcome. But the illusion shattered as her face hardened, her perfectly arched brows knitting together in an expression of pained exasperation. "Oh, Cora," she sighed, her voice a cocktail of pity and impatience. "There's been a misunderstanding. We discussed it, and Eleanor, and I decided it would just be too complicated for you to be here tonight. It's best if you don't come in." The words didn't register at first. I could only stare past her into the warm, honeyed light of the foyer. I saw my mother adjusting a floral centerpiece on the hall table, her back to the door. I saw Nathan pouring a glass of red wine, his head tilted back in a laugh. I saw Iris, curled in an armchair, smiling down at her phone. A perfect family portrait, complete and framed, with no space for me. "Mom," she invited me, I managed, my own voice a stranger's whisper. Sylvia's hand tightened on the doorknob. "Eleanor is emotional." She spoke out of turn. This is for the best, darling. Surely you can understand. My gaze swept past her one last time, a desperate, silent plea for someone, anyone, to turn around. No one did. The silence from the open door was filled only by the distant sound of their merriment. A strange calm descended over me. The frantic hope, the nervous anticipation, it all evaporated, leaving behind a cold, clear certainty. I nodded once, a small, sharp movement. I see, I said again. And I turned my back on the light, the warmth, the laughter, and walked away, the pie and the gifts still in my hands. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, the sound of final, definitive period on a sentence I had been trying to rewrite for 5 years. The tears didn't come until I was safely in my car, the engine off, the windows fogging with my breath. The festive lights of the neighborhood blurred into a painful, beautiful kaleidoscope. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing brand on my soul. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had discussed me. My presence had been debated, weighed, and ultimately rejected. And no one, not my mother, not my brother, not my sister, had thought to pick up the phone to save me this final, brutal severing. My hands were shaking too much to drive. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one number that had always been a safe harbor. Dad answered on the first ring. I couldn't form words, only broken, heaving sobs. Corey? What is it? What happened? She didn't let me in, I finally choked out. She said, they all decided. They don't want me here. His voice, when it came, was tight with a cold, quiet fury I had rarely heard. Where are you? I don't know. A park. A few streets away. Don't move, he commanded. I'm on my way. I hung up and let the grief wash over me. I cried for the little girl who had adored her aunt, for the young woman who had tried so hard to be worthy, and for the family I had lost not once, but twice. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving a hollow, aching void. I drove to Heron Lake Park, a place we used to visit as a family, and parked facing the frozen water. The moon cast a pale, lonely light on the snow, turning the familiar landscape stark and alien. The apple walnut tart sat on the passenger seat, its sweet, homey scent now a cruel mockery. In the stillness of the car, the denial I had so carefully constructed for 5 years crumbled to dust. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a conclusion. This was the result of 1,000 tiny cuts, the forgotten birthdays, the unreturned calls, the family photos I was never in. I had been so focused on being the bigger person, on showing up with an open heart, that I had failed to see that the door had been closing on me all along. The fury came next, hot and sharp, directed not at them, but at my own willful blindness. Headlights swept across my windshield, and Dad's old, reliable sedan pulled up beside me. He was out of the car before the engine was off, his face etched with a fierce, protective love. The moment I saw him, the last of my composure shattered. I stumbled out of my car and into his arms, burying my face in his familiar, worn wool coat, and I sobbed. He just held me, one hand stroking my hair, letting me cry it all out under the cold, silent watch of the stars. They don't get to do this to you, he murmured into my hair, his voice rumbling with a resolve that felt like an anchor. They don't get to break your heart and just close the door. It's over, Dad, I whispered, my voice raw. Let's just go home. He held me at arm's length, his hands firm on my shoulders, his gaze intense. No, this isn't over. This is where it ends. We're going back, Corey. Panic flared in my chest. No, I can't. I can't face them. You won't be alone, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. This isn't about begging for their acceptance. This is about you reclaiming your story. You will not be the girl who was turned away in shame. You will be the woman who stood up and demanded to be seen. Trust me. Something in his unwavering certainty silenced my fear. I saw not anger in his eyes, but a deep, profound belief in my own strength. I nodded, a slow, hesitant motion. We transferred the tart and the gifts to his car, and as we drove back through the silent, glittering streets, I felt a shift within me. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but beneath it, a new feeling was taking root, determination. I never told you the full extent of it. Dad said quietly as we turned back onto Sylvia's street. I didn't want to poison you against your mother. But Sylvia's need to control Eleanor, to be the most important person in her life, it's pathological. She did it with Eleanor's friends in college, with our own parents. Anyone she perceived as a rival for Eleanor's affection and loyalty, she methodically cut out. And I'm a rival? I asked, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening clarity. You're my daughter, he said simply. In her world, that makes you the enemy. You refused to choose a side, so she chose for you. We pulled up to the house, its festive lights now looking garish and false. This time, Dad didn't ring the bell. He walked to the door and knocked, a firm, resonant sound that was a demand, not a request. He placed a hand on the small of my back, a silent, steadying presence. The door swung open and Sylvia's face, prepared with another polite dismissal, faltered at the sight of my father. Thomas, what on earth are you doing here? We're here to see my family, he said, his voice dangerously calm. My daughter was invited to Christmas dinner. There was a mistake, Sylvia began, trying to regain control. It's best if you both. I think it's best, Dad interrupted, raising his voice just enough to carry into the house, if Eleanor knows her sister is turning her daughter away from her door on Christmas Eve. From the hallway, we heard a glass clink. What's going on? My mother's voice. She appeared behind Sylvia, her face a mask of confusion. Thomas? Cora? I thought. They were just leaving, Eleanor, Sylvia said quickly, attempting to block her view. Actually, we're here because Sylvia just told Cora she wasn't welcome, Dad said, his eyes locked on my mother. She said you'd all discussed it and decided it was for the best. Eleanor's gaze flew from my tear-streaked face to her sister's. What? That's not true. Cora, I invited you. I set a place for you myself. The living room had fallen silent. Nathan and Iris appeared in the doorway behind our mother, their faces a mixture of curiosity and alarm. Your sister told our daughter to go ruin someone else's holiday, Dad continued, each word landing with quiet, devastating force. The color drained from my mother's face. Sylvia, did you say that? Sylvia's composure finally began to crack. I was protecting you, Eleanor. From all the drama, from her loyalty to him. I was never disloyal to you, Mom. I found my voice, clear and stronger than I expected. I just refused to hate Dad. That's enough. Mom's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. She stepped past Sylvia, her eyes, for the first time in years, truly seeing me. Sylvia, what have you done? I did what had to be done. Did you really tell Cora we didn't want her here? Nathan asked, a deep frown creasing his brow. That's not what I said, Sylvia deflected, her eyes darting between them. It is what you said, I stated, the memory seared into my brain. We don't want you here. That's a direct quote. Iris pushed forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. You said that? We were waiting for her. What exactly have you been doing, Sylvia? Mom's voice was dangerously quiet. Making decisions about my children, about my life, without my knowledge? She stepped forward, and for the first time, Sylvia fell back. My mother looked at me, at Dad, and at the grand house around us, as if seeing it all for the first time. Move, Sylvia, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, her face a storm of fury, Sylvia stepped aside. Dad squeezed my shoulder as we entered the house, crossing the threshold that had been a barrier just an hour before. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and pine and the unraveling of 5 years of lies. The living room was a stage set for a perfect Christmas, but the actors were frozen, their festive masks fallen away. Sylvia told me you were having an affair, Mom said, her voice hollow as she sank into a chair. She said she had proof. Proof of business trips, Dad countered quietly. Which I offered to show you. You wouldn't look. Because she told me they were forgeries, Mom whispered, the awful truth dawning on her face. Iris suddenly spoke, her voice trembling. Is that why you told me not to read Dad's letters, Aunt Sylvia? You said they were manipulative. Dad's face went pale. I wrote to you every week for a year, Iris. I thought you just didn't want to hear from me. I never got them, Iris said, tears streaming down her face. Not one. All eyes fell on Sylvia, whose facade had completely crumbled. "I was protecting this family," she shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. "No, Sylvia." Mom stood, her spine straight, her gaze clear. "You were controlling it. You systematically isolated me from my husband and then from my own daughter." "My daughter." She repeated the words, claiming them. She crossed the room and took my hand. "And I let you. I am so sorry, Cora. So very sorry." At her touch, at the raw, undisguised grief in her eyes, the dam inside me broke. I fell into her arms, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt the unconditional embrace of my mother. Over her shoulder, I saw Sylvia's face twist with a final, desperate fury. "I think it's time for you to leave, Sylvia," Dad said quietly from the doorway. "This is my house," she spat. "Actually," Mom said, her voice firm, her arms still wrapped around me, "it's my house. And I am asking you to go." Sylvia looked around for an ally and found none. Nathan and Iris stood together, their faces etched with betrayal. With a final, venomous glare, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. In the ringing silence, Iris looked at the tart I still held and started to laugh, a broken, hysterical sound. "You brought an apple walnut tart," she choked out. Sylvia's deathly allergic to walnuts. And in that moment of shared, absurd tragedy, we all began to laugh, a gut-wrenching, cleansing sound that felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for far too long. In the wreckage of our perfect Christmas, we had found something real. That night was not a magic wand. It did not erase 5 years of pain. But as we packed up the uneaten dinner and caravan to my father's small, warm loft, it felt like a beginning. We sat on the floor, eating prime rib off paper plates and drinking expensive wine from mismatched mugs, and we began to talk. Really talk. Nathan spoke of his secret love for music, a passion Sylvia had dismissed as impractical. Iris showed us the portfolio for the art school she'd secretly applied to, not the business college Sylvia had chosen for her. Mom, her eyes shining with a long dormant light, spoke of returning to her pottery. Sylvia always said it was a messy, pointless hobby, she said, a sad wonder in her voice. We opened our gifts there on the floor of Dad's loft. My presents were no longer olive branches, but affirmations of the true selves that had been buried for so long. And when I opened Iris's gift to me, a small, beautiful painting of the view from my apartment window, a view she could only have known from my Instagram posts, I understood that, even across the chasm, she had been trying to see me all along. The journey back to each other has been slow and deliberate, a careful navigation of a landscape still riddled with fault lines. Mom found her own small apartment and now teaches a pottery class at the local arts center. Nathan has started taking guitar lessons. Iris is thriving in her first year at art school in the city. Dad remains our anchor, a quiet presence offering support without judgment. I learned that my worth is not determined by my ability to earn a seat at someone else's table. I learned that sometimes, the most powerful act of self-love is to walk away from a door that is closed to you and to build your own, with a door that is always open to those who cherish you. 6 months after that Christmas, we gathered at my apartment for a simple weeknight dinner. The late summer sun streamed through the windows of my living room, illuminating the faces of my family, not perfect, not completely healed, but present and trying. As I looked at them, laughing and talking around my small dining table, I felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more profound than the desperate hope I had carried to Sylvia's door. This wasn't a fantasy of a perfect family. This was something better. It was real. We had lost so much time, but we were learning that family is not a static thing you possess, but a living garden you tend, with honesty and forgiveness, day by day. And some gardens, after a long, hard winter, can bloom again, more beautiful and resilient than before.